Welcome to Shadow Talk, a cybersecurity podcast powered by ReliaQuest, the leader in agentic AI security operations. I'm John Dilgen, Threat Intelligence Analyst.
And I'm Alexandra, Threat Intelligence Manager. And you might hear a little bit of background noise today. That's because we are recording at our annual customer conference, Exponent. But hopefully you can hear, how exciting it is, how much atmosphere we've got. So we're really excited to be here today.
So for our listeners at home, let me paint a picture. Imagine a threat actor who doesn't need to access your environment. Instead, they need to call your help desk and ultimately convince an end user to join in to their host. Well, that's what many cybersecurity leaders are facing today, and that's why we're joined by our two guests today to talk about how they deal with these real-world issues, specifically focused on our annual threat report and some of the key threats we've seen evolve out of 2025. For our listeners at home, you're going to be familiar with our annual threat report. We've covered it in multiple stages over the last few episodes. What's different today, as I mentioned, we're joined by those cybersecurity leaders to really get their perspective around how they deal with these threats. So starting off with introductions, Chris, I'll pass it over to you.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Chris Thompson, and I am the CISO at Caris Life Sciences, a biotech company out of the Dallas, Texas area.
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Andreano, Chief Information Security Officer of our Information Security team.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the introductions there. So the first sort of key theme that we want to talk about that we saw coming up again and again in attacks from last year was speed. So I'm sure you've heard this a lot today. We like to talk about it a lot here at ReliaQuest. But attackers are operating faster than most teams can respond. We saw the average breakout time last year was 34 minutes, and that was actually about a 29% drop from last year. So showing that attackers are getting faster. And we saw the fastest times were actually 4 minutes. So 4-minute breakout time, it's sort of crazy numbers, really. And John, we've mentioned breakout time a lot. Can you just remind us what is breakout time? How do we define that?
Yeah, certainly. So for those of you who aren't aware, breakout time is that time between initial access and lateral movement. Or in other words, that time between when the threat actor gets that first foothold on the network and is then able to pivot to other hosts. And it's a really critical time because once they spread to other hosts, it makes it that much more difficult to actually contain the threat and prevent them from running their final objectives. Exactly.
And I think what's interesting is that this doesn't seem to be an anomaly. This seems to be sort of the new normal. So when breakout time is dropping this low, it sort of forces us to think differently about what being prepared actually means. So I'm interested in what our guests think. Like, how does it change how you think about being prepared, Michael?
I mean, being prepared, and we've seen many analogies to pro sports teams, right? It's practice. We watch professional golfers. They take thousands of shots and putts before they just play once over the weekend where it counts, right? So same thing applies to information security teams. The true response team is even bigger than your security team, right? It's your legal team, it's your communications team, it's your infrastructure, the other parts of IT, and all the business leaders that need to stay informed, right? So you want to practice that as much as possible. Tabletop exercises, contact lists, understanding who your key vendors are and what they mean. So again, practice until you think you have it, and then practice a couple times more. So I think that's the only way to really stay prepared, right? And throw some anomalies into the testing, where all of a sudden, this person's unavailable, or this system's not accessible. And how are you going to respond to that? So when anomalies hit during a true incident, you're prepared and ready, and you're not shell-shocked, because things are not going to work as planned no matter how much you try, right? So lean on your experts, let the cream rises to the top in those kind of situations.
Yeah, I really like that. I think, you have to have those plans already in place so that you can act quickly. But like you say, you can't just assume that everything is going to go to plan. So you have to be ready for the curveballs.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Right.
Chris, how about you? Anything to add there?
Yeah, so anytime we see a trend changing like that, I think it's important to do root cause analysis and understand why that change is happening. With this particular data point, I think there's there's probably several things you could look at, but one would be the fact that people are tending to come in now with higher levels of privilege in the first place, which allows them to get that lateral movement that they're looking for eventually. How do they get that? It means they're getting through to the more privileged accounts or to the higher level accounts. Could be your administrators or your whales in the C-suite who are more exposed with more visibility, right? So once we get to that root cause in every environment and figure out what that is, then we can implement a strategy on how to go at that. And to Michael's point there, right? Getting practice with some of these people is sometimes the hardest thing. Practice with your C-suite on how to be more prepared is very difficult at times to get. So that's where it comes down to the communication and the messaging of the issue. If we can, our job as CISOs and executives in the cyber area is to convey those technical issues at a high level that's understandable to them so that they understand the impact and then buy into the process to help us with that change. So yes, practice is where it's at, to Michael's point again, and just got to see where it fits in each individual environment.
Yeah, I really like that answer. You know, I'll relate it back to my experience in incident response, and one of the things we worked on there was doing tabletop exercises, and it really became clear the struggles in communication a new team will have, or a team that doesn't practice regularly, and how they work out those struggles to be ready for the time an active event strikes. And then to Chris's point, I'll also say, you know, he brought up that attackers are now arriving more with privileged credentials to start that initial access, so they don't have to take the time to elevate during the attack chain. And that leads us nicely into our next topic, because a lot of the ways that they're getting these credentials are through social engineering. As a matter of fact, in our annual threat report, we found that 1 in 4 incidents are now initiating access through social engineering, often targeting those administrators, those executives, in a variety of forms.
I think just to like echo that, it feels like we come into the office every day and there's another social engineering attack that's happened. So it is absolutely top of mind for probably a lot of people in this room at the moment.
Yeah, it certainly is, and to piggyback off of that, we've seen a lot of critical threats last year and evolving into this year take advantage of that social engineering. I imagine many of our listeners are familiar with Scattered Spider and their traditional phone call impersonation methods. Recently, that's more evolved now into the group Shiny Hunters. And we've even also seen help desk impersonation take place through Black Basta. And the group actually declined, however, very recently in the last few months, that primary tactic that they used of Microsoft Teams phishing and help desk impersonation is on the rise again. It's very difficult to defend against. So my question here for our security leaders, how do you think about defending and educating non-IT staff when new methods are constantly evolving? And what are some of the challenges around that? Michael, we'll kick it off with you.
Sure. So I think of the boy who cried wolf, right? If I'm just constantly sending out communication after communication after communication, people may read them less or take them less seriously. They're just busy, right? So, I think what we should try to do as security leaders is make sure they're succinct, there's something actionable, and something that they can relate to, right? So don't make it a whole 6-paragraph essay. 3 bullets is really all people want a quick takeaway from. They probably appreciate it, right? Mm-hmm. So in creating that security culture, it's great if we can help people create good security habits at home, right? So again, practice. So they're doing good security hygiene at home, and they're bringing that to the office with them as well. So, and then it just pays it forward, and then hopefully they can teach future generations on how to do good security practices too, because I'll tell you, from what I see and what I read, people are less and less concerned about privacy, and they're willing to, exchange their own personal information. So the threat actors love that. They're like, yes, please, and but creating that strong culture that's persistent even outside the office is probably the best thing you can do. So it's that balance of education and takeaways and things that people can connect and relate to, so that they instill it in the day-to-day. And it's hard because we have to all be right every time. Threat actors have to be right once. It's not fair. It really isn't, So yeah, it's a constant struggle.
It's certainly not fair, and I do really like that answer, specifically how you mentioned pushing that company culture to the home and the lifestyle beyond the user of what they do in the office. And it really seems to become critical now, relating it back to Shiny Hunters, as they are often approaching end users on their mobile devices, or a lot of these challenges where there are limited security controls around that, and it really is that end user education that's going to be one of your primary means of defense there.
That's exactly it. There's more coming in through public means of LinkedIn and social media. Infected ads on sites that people go and read. So you're really fighting not only your own company infrastructure to defend, but stuff you can't control: personal phones, home computers, LinkedIn. People's personal career at stake, and their contacts within. So it's keeps you up at night.
Yeah, a never-ending battle. It sounds like. So similar question over to you, Chris. How do you educate non-IT staff while also balancing every new threat that's evolving?
Yeah, Michael's absolutely correct. The goal is culture change, which is probably the most difficult thing you can do in information security. Look, the facts are if humans were not involved in this decision chain at all, there would be no issues. The computers don't trust each other, but humans are trusting by nature. And we want to be forgiving and listening, so when we get that external Teams call, we want to believe that it is who they say they are. That's the problem, right? So we have to get the mindset in place of how do we change that. Like in muscle memory, it takes thousands and thousands of reps for it to become an involuntary reaction, right? But the human brain can actually adapt a lot faster than that. So we've just got to find what works in each individual environment to make that adaptation. And that culture is very hard. So some training things work for a group of people, but not for others because they either don't take them or they don't listen or they're moving right on. But it's a combination approach. Much like having John Gruden on the stage today, right? It takes 11 people on the field to do one play. That's kind of how you need to approach the culture change too. You attack it through direct communication, you through team collaboration, through training modules, through phishing experiments, through TTXs, whatever it takes. But to Michael's point as well, relating that to them personally really hits home. Like if you say, the things you're doing here can also account for how you protect your information at home within your family and in your environment there. And making it personal obviously makes it more acceptable to the end user.
And I think just a final thing to add on there, talking about non-IT staff, it really does extend to your whole organization. Like I had a conversation this morning about some of the North Korean insiders that we're seeing, North Koreans sort of applying to be software developers and fooling HR staff into thinking that they're real applicants. So this sort of social engineering warning needs to be extended to, practically the whole company who might be affected by this.
What I was going to say too, Chris brought up a good point. Everybody learns differently and receives information and processes it differently. So doing different things versus written communication, videos, hands-on interactive training, anything you can do, tapping into those different resources because people learn differently. That's a great point.
Yeah, I really like that. Different layers of education. And I'd also think, too, there's an element of defense in depth here around the education. When that user is going to inevitably click that new link that's emerging or follow that new social engineering. Another aspect that we're commonly seeing with shiny hunters, for example, is them impersonating an organization's domain. And what they're doing is they're getting the user to navigate directly to that domain, oftentimes some type of single sign-on application with the organization's name or a typo-squatted version of that organization's name within that. And so really trying to find a way to have some type of digital risk monitoring that can get out in front of that threat and really identify those as they come in is just crucial.
Shadow Talk is brought to you by ReliaQuest, the global leader in AI cybersecurity. ReliaQuest helps enterprise cybersecurity teams contain threats in minutes with its agentic AI security operations platform, Gray Matter. ReliaQuest makes security possible for the most trusted enterprise brands in the world. Learn more at ReliaQuest.com.
So we've talked a lot about threat actors getting faster, and we know organizations need to match their speed. But the tough question there is, how do they actually get faster? Alex, we see organizations that use manual containment averaging a 6-hour response time, whereas we see organizations running automated response be able to achieve an average containment around 4 minutes, or what that key fastest threat actor we saw was in our annual threat report. In your opinion, what are some of the challenges that organizations face when they implement automated response?
I mean, the range of reasons that people are maybe hesitant to implement automated responses are really varied. You know, it might be the sort of culture in the organization. It might be, you've got sort of business critical systems that you can't afford to sort of have any downtime on. It might be that you haven't quite got the sort of technical controls in place. But one of the things that we always sort of talk about when we're talking about automation to organizations is, just sort of start small. Just look at that low-hanging fruit. Look and see how you can start on your automation journey. Not saying to sort of automate everything all in one go, but just pick off those easy things. See what your risk appetite is. Talk to other security leaders and see how you can sort of move from there. I mean, Michael, how have you seen this in your experience, sort of hesitance to automation and the benefits of it?
Yeah, so you have to really consider the data you have in front of you, right? So probably reviewing what's been done manually in the past and looking for areas of opportunity, whether it's mundane tasks, disabling accounts, resetting passwords, clearing sessions, things that someone have to go in and you're just going to turn 7 or 8 clicks into one automated, trust verified, action for containment, right? And then that can speed things up to then do maybe, if there's things you're not quite ready for yet, ease into it. You don't have to boil the ocean, right? Find a few quick wins and then go after, the larger tasks and find a good, partner or solution or tool to help validate that. And again, testing.
Yeah, and I think made me think of a good point there, that when we talk about automation when it comes to cybersecurity, it's not just about automating those sort of incident response actions. It might be the case that you're looking beyond, banning a hash or something like that. You're thinking, can we automate those sort of messages that need to be sent out to people when we're trying to verify impossible travel? So it's also thinking about those, sort of human-to-human interactions that you can automate as well. Chris, anything from you on that one? The sort of automation that people might be, very pro or very hesitant to embrace.
Yeah. So when you talk to, for example, a first time or a couple who's having a baby for the first time, right? You ask them. I think one of the worst questions you could ask them is, "Are you ready?" Because they could have painted the room, gotten the crib and everything ready, but you know what? The answer is always no, because they've never done it before. Okay, so. The same security is the same way. You can have all the plans in place, you can have all the preparation, all the tools, defense in depth. If you don't rehearse these problems you could have, you never know how you're going to respond when it happens, right? That's where the readiness, the preparation, the equipping your team through experiences to handle what comes up is going to really pay dividends. And when it comes to automation, that's an area where it'd be easy for a cyber team to overlook that piece of preparation because we think we've offloaded that task to an automation. I think that's a mistake. I think you let the automations happen, but you use those as learning tools for the rest of the team to see what happened and to see how they would respond in the real world, because they may have to do it someday, right? We call them hot washes, right? After every incident or anything like this, you always discuss what happened, what the preparations were, what the remediations were that happened, and how do we prepare it from not happening the next time. I think if we apply that same model to the automated tasks that are helping our lives a lot in the security space, it'll make us all better engineers.
Yeah, I really like that, almost like a debrief after an incident to see where you can make those improvements and put those automations in place. And I want to pull back to one thing that Alex mentioned, and I think Chris mentioned as well, which was, discussing how other security leaders are able to implement those automations and having that be a really good source of feedback. And as a reminder here, we are live at Exponent today, so certainly a really good point to be able to just discuss to those other security leaders and really get some insight and feedback into how they're dealing with those challenges and deploying automation as well. So, a lot of the threats we've outlined in our annual threat report really kept coming down to some key foundational security gaps that are getting exploited time and time again by the threat actors. Things like insecure VPNs, help desk procedural flaws, and weak password controls. It seems like the threat actors will quickly find the weakest areas of the environment to exploit. So my question, Alex, why are some of these foundational gaps so hard to fix in organizations?
Again, I think this one, really, really does depend on the organization. It can be that some organizations are just sort of in reactive mode, and they're just constantly sort of fighting fires, and so they never get the chance to step back and fix some of these foundational controls that will really make a difference. It might be that there are sort of political things within an organization that you need to get funding or time spent for certain things. And then, another interesting angle could be the fact that you might always be starting again. And by that, I'm talking about the M&A situation. You might be a large organization that's got your security all sorted, but then you acquire a new organization, a smaller organization, and that's almost like starting from zero. You don't know what that organization has got. We've seen this come up time and time and again last year with Akira, for instance. They exploited sonic wall VPNs in a lot of organizations, and those they're quite sort of easy to use, quite inexpensive technologies that smaller companies use, and those are exactly the type of companies that are going to be acquired. And what we saw was that when they were bought by a bigger company, oftentimes the bigger company didn't even know that these devices were existing. So, that's one of the ways in which, the foundations are so hard to fix, because you don't even know that they exist in the first place. And then I think another reason is there's always something new, right? There's always something new and shiny that you can sort of look at and consider investing in. So maybe I'll start with Chris this time. How do you sort of balance the pressure between these new tools, which may well turn out to be very, very beneficial, but the new sort of shiny thing, versus the old boring fundamentals?
Yeah, that's a great question, because balance is the key word. You have to do both. You mentioned Black Boss earlier, right? They were hot and heavy until about 2024. Then they took a little dip, and now they're back. Why are they back? It's not because they went anywhere. It's because their old tactics still work. So why wouldn't they try it again, right? So we can't ignore those old tactics. The human factor is always going to be there. People still get SMSs that they respond to, right? It's human nature. So we have to understand that even though we don't see it every day, and there's not a whole lot we do actively to defend against it, it's still there as a threat. So we have to take it seriously. At the same time, in the cyber world, you have to always be thinking a year down the road minimum, right? Everybody's talking about AI these days at every conference you go to. That's because it is naturally growing into every single tool that we encounter. If an organization is not ready for that now, then you're already about 12 months behind, right? So having the wherewithal to predict future trends and see how they impact your individual organization, and then talk to the tool vendors and what are being proposed in those areas, has to be coupled with that historical nature. Like you said, it's unfair. we have to deal with 30 years of cyber history and try to predict 3 years in the future. It's a difficult task, but that's why we rely on the network of peers that we have in the cyber industry and in our own verticals that we work in, and also in the individual vendors that we work with, and helping us predict these trends and do the best we can as a group.
Yeah, I really like that topic you brought up around Black Boss's return, and specifically that you highlighted that the method is returned because the tactic's still working. And the reason I bring that up is because often as we work with our customers, it really was surprising to me as that tactic evolved. The customers who were able to have targeted user training around that, we really saw them stop that initial access method before it ever began, and a lot of times those end users weren't even joining the remote session. So really just goes to the point we made earlier about social engineering and targeted user training really being an effective method.
Yeah.
Just to piggyback on a couple of those discussions, right? So we talk about like password controls, okay? So we're kind of gone are the days where you're just putting in ampersands and the @ sign for character substitution. Congratulations, you have avoided a dictionary attack. Now we're into double-digit password length, right? And so this is again where there's a training opportunity. So rather than people thinking they're going to have to do 12 or 16 character uppercase, lowercase, exclamation point, pound sign, you teach them how to do a passphrase. Multiple words. So if it's 3 5-character words, I only have to know 3 things. That's it. So again, it's that training opportunity, it's that culture, changing those habits, making them good habits. Hopefully they can do the same thing on their passwords at home and use different passwords at home and things like that on their different accounts. So that's really, advancing our defenses because to Chris's point, the same schemes and tactics still work. So we have to evolve how we defend against them, and password length is the new leak code, right? Leak code, I guess you call it, right? Mm-hmm. The other one is like the help desk pieces. Is it's becoming more and more easy to trick a help desk person, right? So now, there's some technical tools and some one-time codes you can implement within your company to help mitigate that risk and truly verify the one-time code of what someone's doing and that they are who they say they are. With all the deepfake AI technology, people can voice over any sort of language or tone that they want. So I read something recently that like a soft, kind Southern female voice is the new attack methodology, because it's very non-threatening and convincing, and who's gonna not trust a kind, warm voice? So again, at the drop of a hat, these things could happen relatively easy and scale, and we have to be right every time.
Yeah, and I think the answers there were both just, again, going back to these fundamentals, right? Like, yes, the new tools are great, and we're now all using AI as part of our defenses, and that's something that we would never have thought about a couple of years ago. But it is being able to distinguish those shiny new tools from the genuine advancements that are actually going to sort of give us a real advantage over the attackers. So as we're sort of thinking about closing now, I'm really interested, while we've got two security leaders here, the numbers in this report, the type of content that we've discussed, the statistics, the new techniques. How do those help you? Do they help you in conversations with the board? Do they help you to make these arguments about having more funding for cybersecurity or the importance of it, or are they more sort of useful at the tactical level? I'm just interested, while we've got you here, to hear about it, Chris.
Yeah, 100% that the data is helpful at a personal level within the cybersecurity organization. Translating that to board presentations and executive presentations, it is also very helpful if you've got a response to these changing trends, right? So that's why it's really relevant to receive information like this from a vendor like you that has visibility into a lot of different industries and companies, because you're encapsulating all that into what could be a future state for our own individual organizations, right? But we, like we talked about earlier, we have to predict multiple years down the road. This is a way we do that. If we can see these trends and changes and work that into our strategy at the cyber level, then that's where it's going to be most effective, right? And seeing that the tactics and techniques and procedures of these threat actors are changing constantly is a message we have to reinforce at the board level. If the board thinks that you're never going to get hit with a cyber attack, you're not doing your job, right? We have to explain to them this is an inevitability. It's just a matter of what degree the attack is going to be effective and how quickly we can remediate and recover from that attack. There's no way to prevent everything, right? So using information like in y'all's report that was just released is really helpful. Incorporating that with our own experiences, with other threat intel that we see from other sources, gives us a better picture of what the future looks like.
Yeah, and I mean, some of these numbers and stats, they just roll off the tongue, right? 4-minute breakout time, that's something that everyone can understand and appreciate the scale of. Michael, how about your perspective?
Yeah, so I agree with what Chris said. If you're up there telling your board that you're bulletproof and you're never going to get breached, that's what I call a resume generating move. So, you're better off being real and almost being a little vulnerable and explaining to them, the risk landscape and what's changing, and more importantly, what are we doing about it, right? So that's what I would recommend people, that's what the industry leaders say about how to talk to a board. Understand your landscape, communicate, share successes. So share successes with your board. Let them know that we're all in this together. You definitely need their support, and you'll report back as to the progress of your program. But again, don't be too cocky, right? I think that's good advice for any leader. But know when to demonstrate and be the leader that you are, and tell your story. I think storytelling is the best way to get buy-in and support.
Yeah, I really like both of those answers. It almost sounds like, in layman's terms, you're essentially using the assumed breach model as you communicate to your board, and really trying to get in front of that threat. So as we begin to wrap things up here, a question for both of you. Thinking about the annual threat report, thinking about your own experience and wisdom, if you're talking to your other security leaders in front of you right now, what's one key takeaway or one thing that they should prioritize first, in your opinion? Michael, we'll start with you.
I would say understand your risk landscape, right? And know what your capabilities are, know what the gaps are, and know how you're going to address them. And think of the 80-20 rule, right? What can I put in an initial 20% effort in to get 80% effectiveness? And then worry about how you're going to get that last 20% across the board, because you might need a specialized third party, you might need to hire some resources, bring in somebody to do something, or just ask for more money, build a better business case. But that's kind of what I would recommend.
Yeah, taking things into account based off that risk assessment you have to build your prioritization. Chris, same question to you. What's your major takeaway for the security leaders among you?
Yeah, I guess it would be don't get comfortable. I would reference the first two keynotes from today where your CEO talked about ReliaQuest looking completely different in 5 years. And I think all of us that are cybersecurity executioners in the field, if we think our environment in 5 years on the cybersecurity side will look like it looks today, we're getting comfortable, and that's going to be a setup for failure, right? And then it goes back to the second keynote talking about moving from reactive to proactive to predictive, right? We should all at least be operating in the proactive state right now with the goal of being in that predictive state, and that's the only way we can do our best to stay ahead of the threat actors.
Yeah, it certainly is, and oftentimes we find many organizations are stuck in that balance of the reactive and the proactive. So to close everything out here, the threat actor we established at the front of the episode, they didn't need fancy malware to get into your environment. They just needed a phone call, a convincing argument, and a gap in our help desk procedures. But as our talk outlined, the organizations that are fixing those key foundational gaps, implementing automated response to ensure quick containment, and treating that help desk as a serious, critical initial access vector are the ones who are getting themselves ahead of the threat. I want to say thank you to both of our guests today, Chris Thompson and Michael Andreano, for joining us today and providing your wisdom. I want to say thank you to our listeners. That's all for this week on an episode of Shadow Talk. As before, if you could subscribe to get notifications to your podcast platform of choice, as well as if you could leave us a review, it would really help grow our platform and reach new listeners. We'll be back next week with another episode of Shadow Talk.
Thank you.